Federico, we are fresh off of your review of the iPad Pro, and we're going to jump back in on our OS wishlist series. And today's show is brought to you by App Figures, InnoReader, and Pingdom. Welcome to the show, Federico. I don't know why I welcome you to the show now, but it's good to have you back. I feel like it's been 3 days since I last talked to you.
Well, yes. Hi. Thank you. So official every time. Yes, it's good to be here. It's been quite a week, but I'm really happy with the way that the iPad Pro review went and the special episode that we did. And we're going to continue talking about iPads today.
Yeah, we are going to talk about iPads. It was really neat to see the reaction to your videos and your GIFs and everything, because I think I'm, of course, very biased, but I think that you showed off center stage better than anyone around. And those videos did a great job of capturing exactly how the animation works. And we sat there and watched as we saw the gigabytes of data come streaming off of Mac Stories, because we have a brand new setup for that sort of thing. And fortunately, it's a very cost-effective way setup because there was an awful lot of data coming out of the off the website, and that just showed me that a lot of people were saving your GIFs to send back at you for years to come, I'm sure.
I saw the modified versions of the GIF that sort of became a meme with different music and messages sort of superimposed on the GIF. That was fun.
I like Dan Moren's an awful lot. Dan Moren did like a little as though it was an introduction to a retro TV show. I thought it was really
to like an 80s TV show. Yeah, that was
right. That was really well done. He did a great job with that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we talked about the hardware when we had our special episode about the review. Today we're going to talk about the software side of things. So why don't we just dive right in on iPadOS? Because I know, especially having used the iPad Pro hardware, I gotta think that has at least influenced some of your priorities and your wishes this year.
Right. There's a lot of that at the moment, where sort of like a common theme in all these iPad Pro reviews, including mine, is the fact that the iPad hardware is so much more advanced than the software at this point. And that was true before, but I feel like that divide has grown even greater with the new iPad Pro because of all these new possibilities that we have with Thunderbolt and USB 4 and, the M1 chip, of course. And so there's even more disparity between the iPadOS software and all the limitations that have been around for a long time. But at this point, it really shows that the iPad is so powerful in hardware, but there are all these issues and all these limitations, these missing features really that we would love to see in iPadOS 15. So iPadOS 15 is, it's pretty safe to say it's coming in a couple of weeks at WWDC alongside iOS 15 and all the other software updates. And we thought for our series, we'd just do a standalone iPadOS only wish list where we get to share all of the things, all of the features that we would like to see in iPadOS and that we believe could sort of bring the iPad forward in software, because the hardware, it's already there, but the software needs to do a big jump. Now, I don't know, usually we're not going to get all of this, right? And usually when you say, Apple is just going to fix it at WWDC, they cannot do it all. So there are some features that will be disappointed to an extent, but it's still good to offer like a broader picture of all the features, all the changes we would like to see. And I think we should start with the obvious one, John, widgets.
Yes, absolutely. Widgets, which are now restricted to a column on the side of your iPad, which, it's fine. They're there, but that column gets crowded very fast. You can really only have a few of them showing at any one time, and then you have to scroll, which isn't ideal. I think both of us would like to have these widgets not only to be interactive, as we discussed in our iOS 15 wish list episode, but also be anywhere on the screen. I mean, that's kind of a given. And I'm hopeful, as I said in that prior episode, that the additional RAM in the iPad is going to allow this, so that they will actually not only be able to have them anywhere, but also to be interactive. Because there was some suggestion in some of the interviews last year when widgets came out with some of the Apple people that seemed to suggest that on the iPad it was both a design issue, but that it might have also been to a degree a technical issue. And I'm thinking back to that interview that you did on Connected with Stephen and Mike.
Right, and I feel like there's definitely an argument to be made about the hardware limitations of the previous generation iPad Pros, but I also think that with 6 gigs of RAM in the 2020 model, 4 gigs of RAM in the 2018 model, I still believe there is a possibility for iPad to gain multiple widgets on the home screen without compromising the overall performance. I mean, we had Macs in the past with that kind of RAM that were capable of so much more. And so I feel like in iPadOS 15, I really would love to get the ability to bring widgets, sort of to take them out of the widget column, to place them anywhere on the grid of icons on the home screen. But I also feel like if Apple is going to do this, maybe part of the reason why they didn't do it last year was because they had bigger plans for widgets on iPad. I could see things like greater freedom in terms of rearranging the grid, coming up with even more, diverse layouts, maybe even have new and more widget sizes, right? Because it's not obvious that what worked on the iPhone is also going to work on the iPad. And I could see something like tall rectangles, for example, or multiple variations of a square widget, right? I don't think Apple is going to, I mean, maybe they will, but I don't know. I think they're going to do more than just say, okay, here's the same widgets as last year, and now you can just place them anywhere. And in addition to just placing the widgets anywhere on the iPad, I really hope that they also make those widgets interactive. I know that we mentioned this in the iOS 15 episode, but I feel like especially on iPad, given all the different inputs that are supported on iPad, whether it's touch or keyboard or pencil, I would love to have interactivity of widgets sort of reflect all those potential input methods. And even, I mean, you could go a step beyond that and say, well, on iPad, you can also actually drag and drop stuff between apps. So what if you could drag and drop something onto a widget and stuff happened when you dropped a file or a link, for example, or a photo on top of a widget? You could see something like shortcuts, for example, where you pick up a file and you drop it on top of the shortcuts widget, and the shortcuts widget uses that as an input, right?
Yeah, I love that idea. I mean, you could have really true shelf apps then. I mean, as we've been talking about for years now, right?
Clipboard managers, you could drop things into the clipboard manager and save it. That could be fun. Or, I don't know, there's all kinds of ways that you could go about this if you just free yourself of the idea that it needs to be designed like on the iPhone or like on the Mac. What if, what if the iPad gained a whole new interface for showing widgets? Sort of like, what if it got like a modern dashboard that you press a button and you get this widget view that is not the home screen, it's not the column, it's something else entirely. Like, there's all kinds of ways that Apple could do this. But at a very basic level, I would love to have multiple widgets on the home screen, and I would love for them to be interactive. The extra step would be let those widgets support all kinds of interactions, from touches and keyboard input to the pencil or even drag and drop.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by App Figures, the leading platform for mobile app makers to track and grow their apps, packed with tools for reporting, optimization, and competitive intelligence. If you're making money with subscriptions, you know you need to stay on top of the numbers. And you also know Apple and Google Play leave you with a lot to figure out on your own. App Figures has worked all of this out for you, filling in the blanks so you don't have to. By bringing your core metrics to the forefront and calculating key datasets like MRR and churn, they make it easy to understand exactly what's happening and why, giving you more time to grow your subscription business. If you're not sure where to get started with analyzing your subscriptions, check out AppFigures guides or head on over to appfigures.com to start a free trial and see how much simpler it can be. If you like what you see, use our special code AppStories3030 to get 30% off the next 3 months. Again, all you have to do is go to appfigures.com and use the code AppStories and the number 3030 to get 30% off the first 3 months. AppFigures, analytics, intelligence, and App Store optimization tools. Our thanks to AppFigures for their support of the show. You know, Federico, one of the other things I'd like to see come to the iPad is the app library. You know, I think when we talked about iOS 15, we talked about how neither of us really use it that much. And there are areas where it could be improved, you know, see that show for the details. But there's no swiping to the left on the iPad. I mean, there is room to do something with an app library that you can use to organize and find apps without having to have a whole bunch of home screens.
Yeah, well, the app library, it feels to me like very much like an iPhone feature. If only because I feel like people are downloading more apps on the iPhone, like random utilities, games, you know, all kinds of apps. They're downloading those on their phones. And on iPad, being more like a professional machine, it feels to me like users are perhaps more deliberate in how they're downloading apps from the App Store. But I don't know. I mean, if you look at my iPad, it's always a mess of new apps that I'm trying out from the App Store.
I thought you were suggesting that I'm the least professional iPad user because I've got a lot of apps on my iPad.
I'm trying to think of other people and how they use their computers. But I know that we would use it. We would totally take advantage of it. And again, I just feel like Apple should do a big rethinking of all these app launchers that they have, right? Because right now you look at the Mac, iPhone, and iPad, and there's a lot of inconsistency there. You got the Mac with the dock and the Finder, of course, and you have system-wide launchers. And then you look at the iPhone and you have the home screen and the app library, but you don't have the same universal search that you get on the Mac and iPad. And on the iPad, you have the home screen and the dock, but it behaves differently from the Mac. And you don't have the app library there. And on the Mac, you also have Launchpad, and you don't have Launchpad on iPhone and iPad. I feel like there should be a new story around launching apps and organizing your apps. I'm not sure how. I know that Steve Troughton-Smith was tweeting about this a few weeks ago. And so, I don't know, I feel like there's the potential to do something new entirely with the home screen. I remember some conversations with Apple engineers a few years ago where, and this was before iPadOS even, so we're talking 3-4 years ago, where, you know, we started talking like privately, sort of, these discussions about like, what if in the future the home screen could be more than just a grid of icons, could be more than just mixing widgets and icons, but something else entirely. So I feel like Apple is thinking about like the idea of a launcher that does away with the basic grid and sort of the old idea of just tapping icons. Maybe the app library on iPad is part of that. Maybe an intelligent home screen is part of that, where Siri actually becomes part of the home screen. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's start small and just say maybe the app library should come to iPad, and then we'll see.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you think about it, and the iPad's grid was obviously playing off of what was done on the iPhone, and that made a lot of sense in 2010 when you wanted everything to be familiar, so it would be easy for people to move to the new tablet. And that grid of icons is not unlike what you find on the Mac if you go into your applications folder, for instance. So there's definitely a lineage there. Whether you need to have that or whether you could evolve to something different, I think probably they could at this point. A lot of what we're talking about is interrelated. So, you know, widgets is only really, as you said, part of the puzzle. And one way of dealing with some of the different layouts that you could do on an iPad, sizes, interactivity, is to have the ability to do things like save spaces, which I know we've got in our list of things and we'll get to, but the ability to customize environments for yourself. You know, maybe you have one for work and maybe you have one for personal and a bunch of other things or different kinds of tasks. So I'd love to see some experimentation happen there.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by InnoReader, the premier service for RSS power users. Here's the thing. InnoReader is so much more than just an RS Sync service. With InnoReader, you can monitor email newsletters, Twitter, Facebook pages, web pages that don't even have an RSS feed, and with a recent update to the service, an audio player that allows you to use it for audio content like podcasts too. Stop visiting a long list of bookmarks every single day and let InnoReader deliver the internet to your doorstep through its web app, recently redesigned mobile apps, and third-party apps that integrate with the service too. At its core, InnoReader is a highly configurable RSS service. InnoReader offers extensive search functionality to help you find new feeds and search your existing collection too. It will even recommend new feeds based on your existing ones and help you trim your list based on inactive or dead feeds. InnoReader works on the web with its own iOS and Android apps and with a long list of third-party RSS clients that have integrated the service too. I've used InnoReader for years and have tried a bunch of other services, but none pack the power and innovation that you find in InnoReader, which is why I rely on it to keep track of everything from the things we cover at Mac Stories to my personal interests like movies, video games, and music. InnoReader is free to try, so you have nothing to lose by going to InnoReader.com now and signing up. And for a limited time, App Stories listeners can get a pro plan for 20% off for the first year by using the code MACSTRY and the number 2 at checkout. Again, that URL is InnoReader.com and the code MACSTRY2 for 20% off your first year. I'll put a link in the show notes too. So go there today and take back control of your news feed with InnoReader. Our thanks to InnoReader for their support of the show.
All right, let's talk about the big one. One of the big ones.
Yes, one of the big ones.
So multitasking, right? I feel like this is a difficult conversation because multitasking means something different for each kind of user. But broadly speaking, I feel like there's a universal truth to the argument that the current system, based on split view, slide over, and drag and drop, it was largely designed for the pre-Magic Keyboard and pre-pointer support era of iPad software. The current system is entirely based on touch interactions, and it doesn't account for the fact that an iPad, and especially the iPad Pro, can now be entirely used, if you want, without ever touching the screen. Just by using a Magic Keyboard with the trackpad, you can do all that you need on iPad without ever reaching out to the screen, which was one of the great innovations of last year with the Magic Keyboard and the native pointer and how it all works with iPadOS. But while that sort of aspect of iPadOS progressed, slide over and split view didn't. And they're still stuck on this sort of iOS 11 paradigm of you just got to pick up an app, pick up an icon, and you drag and drop it somewhere, and you enter split view and slide over, right? So I feel like at a very basic level, there needs to be not even deeper, but any kind of support for keyboard interactions, and for doing this without having to touch the screen. Now, obviously, you can manage multitasking with the pointer, with the trackpad. So it's not like you're forced to touch the screen, but you still have to mimic what you would be doing with a finger by using the pointer, right? And I think the whole system needs to be sped up via keyboard shortcuts and faster ways to combine apps together.
Yeah, agreed. I think this system has never worked particularly well in that I've always found slide over to be difficult in a lot of ways. It's too easy to put your slide over into a split view, and it's a little bit difficult to kind of carousel through the different things in slide over. I've always found that to be true when I was using it based on touch, and it's even harder when you're trying to do it with a pointer. You have to be a little more precise about it. And what's odd to me about iPadOS is that in some respects it is a better navigation experience when you're on a keyboard because it's very easy to get search, for instance. Yet at the same time, making those split views and slide over still requires the touch aspect of it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of caught in this middle zone, which is which is awkward. And you're right. If you're doing something that is very keyboard intensive, like writing, for instance, you really don't want to have to be constantly reaching up to change those split views.
Yeah.
So it would, yes, keyboard interaction for that would be fantastic.
And the pointer makes it awkward because those interactions that were supposed to be faster with the finger, they become really awkward to control with the pointer. I mean, if you ever tried to, for example, grab the little indicator between apps to resize a split view, or to take an app in slide over and push it to the left side of the screen and vice versa, it can be really awkward to do that with the pointer because, again, you're mimicking a touch interaction with an abstraction of it, which is the trackpad. Yep. And also, like, I think a point that I raised in my iPadOS 14 review last year was that the iPad now is a modular computer, is a modular machine that supports all kinds of different accessories. And that in iPadOS, thanks to the pointer, it adapts to the accessory that you've paired with the iPad. And so I feel like going forward, all iPadOS features, system features, will have to be designed with this modularity in mind. But a core component of iPadOS, which is multitasking, is still, 3 steps behind because it still behaves the same way it was designed in iOS 11. It didn't evolve with the times, and I would like Apple to have a modern response to that. So definitely have some kind of keyboard integration, but I would go even deeper. I think the overall system right now, the overall structure of it, that it's based on grabbing icons and turning those into windows,
right?
I feel like it's past its time. And it needs to be rethought from the ground up in iPadOS 15. It's caused a lot of confusion for novice users. Like a lot of people who are new to iPad, they get confused very easily. Even just when you want to rearrange tabs in Safari, if you're not careful enough, those tabs become app windows. Right, and you're like, no, I just wanted to rearrange a tab. Why is it turning into this weird thing with the icon in the middle? And for power users, it's too limiting because you don't have the speed, you don't have the control that you're used to having on macOS, for example. So I'm not arguing in favor of let's just take macOS multitasking and bring it to iPadOS. I'm saying I would love to see Apple do with multitasking what they did with the pointer last year. They took an idea of desktop computing and they rethought it completely for the iPad. So it's a common concept. I mean, the pointer is basically the macOS cursor, but it's been redesigned and reimagined and integrated with iPadOS, right? So take the sort of the power user features and the clarity of multitasking from macOS, but redesign it and rethink that for iPadOS. I think that's the way to go.
Right. And just to have some sort of consistency across the system, because I think another thing that does confuse people sometimes is when you, for instance, do a search and then want to take one of those app icons and put it into a split view, you actually drag it out of the search results and drop it onto the desktop. And that's the same action you use to move things from home screen to home screen on your iPad or on your iPhone. And people, I think, been doing that since the very first iPhone was released, is going into jiggle mode and moving things around to reorganize them. And I don't think that it's intuitive at all to take a search result and drag it out into a split view. I mean, I'm used to it, but I don't think that that's something that anyone who is brand new to the iPad would by default try. So, it's that kind of thing.
I feel like there's also like an even deeper, sort of more meta discussion to be had here about like what's the spatial structure of multitasking in the sense that, like, and this is very sort of high level conceptual design thinking, but the current system is sort of like a one-to-one match between the app and its window, in the sense that when you take Safari and you put it in split view on the left side, and then you take Notes, for example, and you put it on the right side, Now, those two apps are permanently paired together, and that's
Yep.
called a space, right? But what if you just want to cycle through the app on the right, right? Every time, and I remember back in the day when I used to do a show all about the iPad called Canvas with Fraser Spears on Real FM. This was one of the points where Fraser kept talking about all the time. What if you just want to keep an app on the left and you want to cycle through the app on the right? Back in the days of iOS 9, that used to be possible because there was a different app picker on the right side of the screen.
Right.
Now, you just got to drag and drop icons over and over if you want to switch what's on the right. And there's no good way to say, okay, I'm keeping my primary, sort of quote unquote, primary activity on this side of the screen, but I want to cycle through a bunch of utilities, a bunch of additional research material, for example, on the right side. And this is one of the complaints that I keep hearing all the time from pro users like academics and students, for example, researchers who want to get their work done on iPad Pro. It's so tedious because you're tied to this one-to-one match between windows and this insistence on creating spaces where a lot of people just want to say, I'm keeping like my research on the left and I want to cycle through multiple documents on the right. What's a good way to do that? Maybe tabs could be an idea, right? So maybe you could keep like multiple apps in a tabbed view. Maybe you could have a switcher just for one side of the screen. Like there's all kinds of ways that Apple could go about this, but the reliance on every time you want to switch apps, you got to pick up the icon and drag it somewhere. I'm really tired of that. And I really want to have something faster than that.
I like the idea of a single window switcher because it's interesting. We have Command Tab on the iPad just like you have on the Mac. However, it really is completely disjointed from the spaces concept, right? I mean, it's not super useful in that circumstance when you have a pair of apps and if you want to keep at least one of those apps in place, that switching isn't going to help you at all. So the idea of being able to switch just one of them out, because it's one of those things, if you're doing research in Safari or something, you might want to take a note in a particular document, and then you might want to go to your text editor, and then you might want to send, a text message to somebody. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you'd want to be in one app as your dominant app, but then cycle through a bunch on the right-hand side. Now, I guess right now the way to do that is with slide over, but I really don't use slide over that much these days. I just find it very clunky, especially when I'm using the keyboard.
Yeah. And then there's the idea of like, what if you could save your favorite combinations of apps? What if you could say, well, you know what, Google Docs and Safari is the kind of workspace that I find myself spending a lot of time working in. So let me just save this as a favorite. What if you could save multiple favorites and filter those in the app switcher? Then again, what if, moving beyond the persistent pairing of apps, what if you said, I just want to recreate this space of Twitter and Messages, or Twitter and Safari, or Google Docs and Safari, but it's not like all those spaces are different windows that I have to open, and then I'm leaving all those windows scattered across the system. What if it's always the same window, but the system is smart enough in just switching the combination of apps? I feel like I would like to have a little less sort of spatial system where this window only exists in one place at a time, and sort of have a more abstract and more flexible system for that.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about when we discussed iOS 15 is the idea of profiles, and that could absolutely work on the iPad as well. It goes beyond just pairs of apps and setups that way, but you could have whole systems revolve around profiles where it's, here's my work profile and the stuff I'm going to use on my iPad when I'm working during the day. And in the evening, I want my home page to switch to the TV app and YouTube and the book app and, all those sorts of things where you can kind of just sweep your work apps under the rug until the next morning and have just the your fun stuff available in the evening when you're relaxing. So I could see that happening as well. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Pingdom from SolarWinds. While you've been listening to this podcast, how would you know if your website had gone down? Would you know if your customers couldn't click the buy button on your website or fill out a trial form? You might stumble across the problem by luck, but that means you've already lost out on new customers. You need something to tell you everything is running smoothly on your site, and more importantly, when it isn't. So you need Pingdom. Pingdom detects around 13 million outages every single month. That's more than 400,000 outages every day. And for as low as $10 a month, Pingdom helps keep your site online. It doesn't matter if you're a startup or a Fortune 500 company. You need real-time alerts about critical website issues and customization of how you're alerted, whether it's via SMS, email, or your team's collaboration apps. Pingdom even tracks and analyzes your website's load time, so you can see what's affecting your user's experience. If you have a website, you need Pingdom. Take charge of monitoring your site in minutes by going to pingdom.com/signup right now for a 30-day free trial with no credit card required. Then, when you sign up, use the code AppStories at checkout to get a huge 30% off your first invoice. So go on over now to pingdom.com/signup and check it out. Our thanks to Pingdom from SolarWinds for their support of App Stories. Should we take a break from the UI stuff and talk a little bit about displays?
Okay, let's talk about those.
Well, we talked about them quite a bit during the episode about your review, so we don't have to talk about them a lot here. But obviously, right now, all you can do with an iPad is mirror the screen on an external display. And I have a nice setup where I have a free input on my display on my desk where I can do that. I just don't do it very often because there's not a lot of utility in it, because all I'm seeing is the same layout as I would see on my iPad. And now it's bigger. It's got that advantage, but it's still got those big black bars, and I can't have any more information on there than I would on my iPad. So I don't find myself doing it a lot. I know you do it more often, and I mean, since your iPad is your main computer, that makes a lot of sense to me. But when I'm sitting here at a desk where I have the choice between a Mac Mini that takes advantage of this entire 27-inch display and connecting my iPad, where I get this little mini, this black bar version of my iPad's home screen on screen, that's not a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I feel like at a minimum, I would love to see, extended desktop mode. Let's call it extended home screen mode. Just the idea of having separate displays, so having separate things, separate windows between the iPad and the external monitor. And really, the key point for me is that in the future, I would love to have interactions on those external display. Like, let me pick up a window from the main iPad screen and drag it over to the external display, and be able to use the pointer there to just move things around, maybe resize the window. Now, I don't think there should be freely resizable windowing like on macOS, but maybe something like, more split view layouts, with a big enough display, you could fit 3, 4, apps, depending on how much content you want to see in those apps. And you could still have the pointer to manage interactions on a display that you cannot physically touch. That's what the pointer is for. So that would be, having another home screen on the external monitor, and to be able to have control. Really, it's all about having the choice. Do you want to keep mirroring? That's fine. You can do that. Do you want to show an additional home screen? That's also okay. Do you want to just drag windows there when you need them, but keep your primary home screen on the iPad? I would like to do that. And ideally, I could see myself having the kind of setup where on the iPad next to me, I would keep something like Timery, or this other utility that I've been using lately called Focused Work, which is like a timer, like a Pomodoro timer that integrates with Toggle. Like, I could keep that on the iPad, but on the external display, I could have my Obsidian setup with like Obsidian and Safari next to each other, for example. So to have that kind of interactions, again, inspired by macOS, but adapted to iPadOS. So I wouldn't want to, take a window from its corner and freely resize that. But maybe just having the existing split view system, you drag it to one side and it snaps to fill half of the screen. Those interactions like that are simplified for iPadOS, but still powerful enough to let power users get more work done more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, it reminds me a little bit of how what we're discussing really is how people use Sidecar, where you have the iPad as an extra external display. And a lot of people, I know myself included, will do that once in a while, and I'll use the iPad as a place for, I don't know, things like messages or Discord or Slack or something like that. Something I want to keep an eye on that I don't necessarily need the same kind of space for, or as you said, timery, those kind of things. And then I'll just work on my Mac full screen with a text editor or something on my main display. And I think the same sort of setup would be beneficial with the iPad. So here we're just really talking about having the iPad driving both displays, just the way the Mac does when you're using Sidecar. And I'd love to have that.
All right. Do we want to talk about a bunch of other things like the grab bag of features that we also want to see? Because I have a few that I need to mention here.
I do too, and can I start? I've got one. I'm afraid you're going to say it first, so I'm gonna jump in front of you and suggest global hotkeys.
Yep.
Because
yes,
that one is something that is so powerful on the Mac. It's one of those things where even if you only use it with 2 or 3 apps, for instance, when I'm on my Mac with Good Task, I have what is it? Let's see, it's Control N set up so that I can be in the middle of doing something. I'm surfing the web in Safari, and I hit Command N or Control N, and it pops up a window to create a new task because I think of something while I'm reading through an article, and it's really powerful to be able to do that without having to then switch over to that app itself. You can stay in context, and I think that would be really helpful on the iPad as well.
Yeah, just let me assign a keyboard shortcut to anything I want.
Right.
This is so great in, and I know that I mention this often, but in Obsidian, you can assign a keyboard shortcut to any feature of the app. There's literally like a page where you go in and you search for any command, and you can give that a keyboard shortcut. You just search for it by name, and you say, okay, yeah, I want to activate this feature with this keyboard shortcut, and you're done.
It's so right. In Obsidian, it's so extensive that they have to have a search field just to find the right command to set up a keyboard shortcut for. It's extensive. And it would be. I mean, I know that once you go down this global hotkey path, there are opportunities for collisions of shortcuts, but that's true on the Mac too, and that can be dealt with. I mean, you can get a warning, or maybe it just doesn't work. I mean, you try something else. I mean, there are ways to deal with that, and it's been a thing that's been an issue on the Mac forever. I don't think it's holding the Mac back, so I'd like to see on the iPad too.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to mention, let me see. I mean, obviously global hotkeys, that also applies to shortcuts, like let me run a shortcut anywhere just by pressing a global hotkey. Just because I'm so annoyed that if I want to run shortcuts from other places, I gotta invoke the share sheet every single time. It's just so slow. I don't want to do that anymore. Audio equipment. I want to be able to record podcasts on iPad.
We're going to keep asking for this until it happens.
I know, but there's I just have the same support for recognizing audio interfaces and have multiple audio channels, just like you can on the Mac, right? On the Mac, you can have utilities like Sound Source, for example, by Rogue Amoeba that lets you finally control like the speakers, or do you want audio from this application to go to your headphones or to go to this USB interface that you have plugged in? And right now there's no control whatsoever for speakers or microphones in iPadOS to that extent. It's you can all you can do is you open Control Center and you can choose a destination. You don't have an interface for picking the microphone, for picking the kind of input that you want to have. And especially now that, Apple is the same company behind Apple Podcasts. And now they're even launching a subscription service to allow more creators to monetize their shows. But still, the only platform where making those shows is technically possible to a semi-professional extent is macOS. And I feel like there has to be, even if you just make this for podcasters, I feel like given how Apple is investing in this field and given how popular podcasting has, fortunately for us, become over the past few years, then you should do it. Even if you just say this is for podcasters, I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to appreciate that. But the thing is, it's not going to be just for podcasters. It's going to be useful for YouTubers. It's going to be useful for folks who want to stream on Twitch or YouTube, for people who want to create videos, for people who want to do screencasts on iPad, right? All kinds of tasks that deal with video and audio. There should be much better support for controlling those inputs and outputs on iPadOS.
Right. Well, and it falls right into the category that one of Apple's favorite categories, which is creativity through technology.
Yeah.
And this is a place where that's not possible and it's being held back. And so it not only supports a service that Apple's trying to push right now, which is the subscriptions to podcasts, but it also just makes, as you said, people able to do more creative things in all sorts of different ways. And as a result, I think we really ought to get it. I'd love to see it, but we've been saying for years now where we think it might be coming, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that one, but we'll see. All right, Federico, we have to talk about files just really briefly, even though we've talked about this a million times before, especially in our iOS wishlist app, episode. But the Files app, we've now got iPads that can store up to 2 terabytes of information, but the Files app is just too rudimentary in its current state.
Yeah. Okay. What if they renamed it to Finder instead of No, but
they should just go for it.
I think so. But honestly, like even if you just keep it named Files, there's a lot of work to be done there, and I don't even know where to begin. This is not necessarily just exclusive to iPadOS, but I don't know, on iPad and especially on iPad.
It's more important on the iPad though, right?
Yes, it's more important because you got pro users, you got photographers, video makers, all kinds of people who need to be able to manage files with the same efficiency that they can on the Mac. And so things like search for contents of those files, saved searches, smart folders, more reliability, of course. Like you shouldn't have to wait for 20 seconds when you're copying heavy
right.
files from an external drive, like it happened to me in my iPad Pro review. More sorting options, better ways to integrate all of this with shortcuts, right? To be able to say, just let me read files in a shortcut, even if they're not located inside iCloud Drive /shortcuts. Let me poke a hole in the sandbox and read and write files to any directory that I want. Let me browse versions. Let me have a proper version browser in files, like I can in the Finder, where for any document that uses the native macOS APIs for versioning, I can go in and restore an older version. All those, yes, power user features, I think they are important in a file manager, especially if you're selling a computer called the iPad Pro.
Yep. No, I agree. And look, the other thing that comes to mind too is I think Stephen Hackett mentioned on Connected last week, which is backups, external drive backups, where you can actually restore a single file instead of having to do some sort of iCloud restore. So, give pros the ability to have multiple copies of all of their work in different places and be able to get that back easily and quickly, which I think fits in neatly with the versioning that you mentioned.
Yeah.
All right, Federico, that's a lot of wishes. We've been wishing away for the last few weeks. I think the iPad is a place where I am particularly optimistic this year. Maybe I'm getting overly optimistic, but I feel like that incredible hardware has to be there for a reason, and Apple must have something cooking for taking advantage of it. At least I'd like to think so. I guess we'll know. Yeah, we'll know soon enough, won't we?
Yeah.
I mean, my iPad Pro is going to be on its way soon. It'll come right in the middle of that. So I'm hoping that right after that keynote, I'm excited, and then there's a knock on my door and my iPad Pro is handed to me and I can try the beta immediately. But I guess we'll see on that one as well. All right. I want to thank our 3 sponsors again for this episode. That's App Figures, InnoReader, and Pingdom. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is at Fatici on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.